He got a heart transplant, then started dreaming of a murder. Hal Thompson sat in his recliner, staring out the window of his modest Chicago home. The city buzzed beyond the glass, cars honking, children laughing. But Hal felt like he was finally waking up after years of slumber. At 62, retirement had come earlier than expected due to congestive heart failure, a relentless thief that stole not just his strength, but also pieces of his life. For months, he'd been tethered to machines and medications, watching helplessly as Evelyn, his wife of 38 years, took on roles she shouldn't have had to bear. But now Hal could breathe again, literally. Thanks to a donor heart given anonymously, he had a second chance at life. His chest still bore the scar from surgery, but it didn't matter. Every beat reminded him how lucky he was. Evelyn entered the room carrying 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea. "You look deep in thought," she said softly, setting one mug beside him. "Just thinking about all we've been through," Hal replied, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. "Feels strange, doesn't it? Like I'm living someone else's life." "Maybe you are," Evelyn teased gently. "That heart wasn't yours before." Hal chuckled, though her words lingered longer than they should have. It started 3 weeks post-surgery. Hal woke in the dead of night, gasping for air despite no physical pain. The dream had been so vivid. It wasn't random images or fleeting sensations. It was a story unfolding before him. He was running, legs pumping hard against cold pavement slick with rain. Shadows loomed ahead, closing in fast. A scream pierced the darkness, a woman's voice, high-pitched and desperate. Then came the knife, its blade catching the pale glow of a street lamp before disappearing into shadow. When Hal opened his eyes, sweat soaked his pillow. His heart raced, not dangerously, but enough to remind him of what he'd survived. He tried to shake it off. "It's stress," he told himself. "Your body adjusting." But the dreams kept coming. Each night brought new fragments. The same alleyways, the same cries for help, the same sense of impending doom. And always, there was the silver locket. By the 4th week, Hal couldn't ignore the patterns anymore. In the daylight hours, snatches of those dreams haunted him. The texture of the bricks beneath his fingertips, the smell of damp earth mixed with rust, even the taste of metallic fear coating his tongue. It wasn't normal. How could any dream feel this real? One afternoon, while tinkering in his garage, a habit he'd resumed to reclaim some semblance of normalcy, Hal jotted down everything he remembered. He sketched the brick building, noting the faded graffiti scrawled across its side. Maggie's Bar in flickering neon letters. Beneath it, he drew the locket, a small oval shape etched with delicate vines. Evelyn found him later, hunched over the sketches. "What are you working on?" she asked curiously. "Nothing important," Hal muttered, quickly covering the paper. But something inside him whispered otherwise. That evening, Hal joined Evelyn and Claire, their daughter, in the living room. They were flipping channels when Claire landed on a true crime documentary. "This one looks interesting," she said, settling back onto the couch. Hal barely paid attention until the narrator mentioned a name, Jessica Monroe. "Jessica vanished 5 years ago under mysterious circumstances," the narrator explained. Old footage showed police searching a dimly lit alleyway near Maggie's Bar. Her purse was discovered nearby, but her body has never been found. Hal froze. Maggie's Bar, the alley. They matched perfectly with his dreams. Then the screen displayed a close-up of evidence collected from the scene, a silver locket engraved with swirling vines. Hal's blood ran cold. "Dad?" Claire noticed his pallor. "Are you okay?" I think I need some air," Hal stammered, rising unsteadily. Outside, the cool breeze did little to calm him. Was it possible? Could the memories belong to someone else? To the person whose heart now beat within him? Or worse, was he connected to the crime itself? As Hal wrestled with these questions, another realization struck him. If the heart carried memories, then perhaps it carried guilt too. What if the donor wasn't innocent? What if Hal's newfound lease on life came at a terrible cost? One he hadn't anticipated? And more importantly, what would happen if others found out? Hal spent his days consumed by a mission he couldn't explain. The dreams had become more than just haunting visions. They were clues, fragments of something larger that demanded answers. Every morning, after Evelyn left for her volunteer work at the community center and Claire headed to her office downtown, Hal retreated to the quiet sanctuary of the library. He pored over microfiche records, yellowed newspaper clippings, and online forums dedicated to true crime enthusiasts. The case of Jessica Monroe wasn't just unsolved, it was forgotten by most. To the public, she was another statistic in Chicago's long list of missing persons. But to Hal, she felt alive, her presence lingering in every detail he uncovered. One afternoon, armed with courage, and perhaps a touch of desperation, Hal dialed the number listed on an old police report. Detective Maria Ramirez answered on the third ring. "This is Ramirez," came the curt reply. "Detective Ramirez, my name is Harold Thompson. I'm calling about the Jessica Monroe case." There was a pause. "That case is 5 years cold, Mr. Thompson. What makes you think I have time to revisit it?" "I know things," Hal said quickly. "Things I shouldn't know." Ramirez sighed heavily but didn't hang up. "Like what?" Hal hesitated, then described the alleyway behind Maggie's bar, the silver locket, and the faint memory of footsteps echoing against brick walls. Details that hadn't been released to the press. "You're telling me you dreamed this?" Ramirez asked skeptically. "Yes," Hal admitted, "but they don't feel like dreams. They feel real." To his surprise, Ramirez agreed to meet him, not because she believed him, but because dead ends in cold cases often forced investigators to consider even the wildest leads. When they met at a coffee shop near the precinct, Ramirez studied Hal carefully. She noted the scar on his chest peeking above his collar and the exhaustion etched into his face. "Let's say I believe you," she said finally. "What do you want from me?" "I need to understand why I'm seeing these things," Hal replied, "and if there's any way they can help solve Jessica's case." Ramirez nodded slowly. "Okay, Mr. Thompson, let's see where this goes." Hal's next step led him to Sarah Collins, or rather, what remained of her story. Through hospital records, he learned the identity of his donor, a 28-year-old woman who died tragically in a car accident 6 weeks before his transplant. Gratitude overwhelmed him as he imagined the vibrant life cut short so he could live. Yet gratitude soon gave way to unease when he discovered a startling connection between Sarah and Jessica. Sarah and Jessica had been best friends since childhood. Their bond was evident in photos Hal found on social media. Two young women laughing at concerts, posing in front of sunsets, sharing secrets over cups of coffee. When Jessica disappeared, Sarah became obsessed with finding her. She attended vigils, plastered flyers around the city, and even hired private investigators using money saved from waitressing jobs. But Sarah's efforts ended abruptly the night of her fatal accident. According to reports, she'd been driving home late after meeting with someone who claimed to have information about Jessica. The source was never identified, and no evidence suggested foul play in Sarah's death. But Hal couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister connected the two tragedies. Determined to learn more, Hal tracked down Sarah's younger brother, Ethan Collins. Ethan lived in a small apartment on the south side, surrounded by boxes of Sarah's belongings he hadn't yet sorted through. "I've been meaning to go through all this," Ethan confessed as he invited Hal inside. "But it's hard, like saying goodbye all over again." Hal nodded sympathetically. "I understand. That's actually why I'm here. I received your sister's heart." Ethan froze, staring at Hal as if seeing a ghost. Then slowly, he sank onto the couch. "You're the guy—" "She saved my life," Hal continued, "and I want to honor hers by helping find out what happened to Jessica." For hours, Ethan shared stories about Sarah, her determination, her kindness, her refusal to give up on her friend. He also handed Hal a box labeled Jessica's Case, filled with notes, maps, and photographs Sarah had collected during her investigation. Among the items, Hal found a handwritten note tucked inside a spiral notebook. "Maggie's Bar. Ask about Vincent." The name Vincent meant nothing to Hal, but it sparked hope. If Sarah had been chasing a lead before her death, perhaps Hal could pick up where she left off. With renewed purpose, he returned to Maggie's Bar, the neon sign flickering like a beacon in the night. Inside, the air smelled of stale beer and cigarette smoke. Hal approached the bartender, a wiry man with tattoos snaking up his arms. "I'm looking for someone named Vincent," Hal said cautiously. The bartender's expression darkened. "Who's asking?" "An old friend of Sarah Collins," Hal replied. At the mention of Sarah's name, the bartender glanced around nervously. "Look, buddy, I don't know anything. But if I were you, I'd stop digging. Some secrets are better left buried." Before Hal could respond, a shadow fell across the bar. A tall figure stepped forward, his voice low and menacing. "You heard him," the man growled. "Walk away while you still can." Hal's heart pounded, not from fear but from recognition. This was the voice from his dreams. As Hal delved deeper into the mystery, the dreams began to consume him. They weren't just vivid, they were visceral, pulling him into a world that felt more real than his waking life. Night after night, he found himself trapped in Jessica Monroe's final moments, reliving her terror as if it were his own. In one dream, he stood frozen in the alley behind Maggie's bar. The air was thick with humidity, and the distant hum of traffic faded into silence. He saw her, Jessica, running toward him, her face pale with panic. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and she clutched the silver locket tightly against her chest like a lifeline. Behind her, heavy footsteps echoed closer. A figure emerged from the shadows, their features obscured except for one unmistakable detail, a tattooed arm gripping a knife. The blade gleamed under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, its edge sharp enough to cut through the darkness itself. Hal tried to scream, to warn Jessica, but no sound escaped his lips. Instead, he heard distorted whispers, words muffled and warped, yet undeniably menacing. "You shouldn't have looked!" Then came the overwhelming fear. It wasn't his own. It was primal, raw, and suffocating. Hal felt every ounce of Jessica's desperation, her certainty that death was inevitable. And then, before the knife struck, he woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding violently against his ribs. These dreams weren't just flashes anymore. They were scenes unfolding in excruciating detail. Hal could feel the rough texture of the brick wall as Jessica pressed herself against it, trying to hide. He smelled the dampness of the pavement beneath her feet and tasted the metallic tang of blood on the air long before the violence began. Each fragment added another piece to the puzzle. One night he heard a name whispered amidst the chaos. Vincent. Another time, he caught sight of a black van parked near the alley, its license plate partially obscured by mud. In another dream, he saw Vincent's face clearly for the first time, a gaunt man with hollow eyes and a jagged scar running down his left cheek. By day, Hal scribbled these details into a notebook, connecting dots that seemed impossible to trace. But at night, the memories returned, dragging him back into the nightmare. Evelyn noticed the toll it was taking on him. Dark circles shadowed his eyes and his hands trembled when he reached for his coffee mug. "Hal," she said gently one morning, "you're not sleeping." "What's going on?" "I'm fine," he lied, avoiding her gaze. "No, you're not. You haven't been yourself well, since everything started happening. Is this about those dreams again?" Hal hesitated. How could he explain what he didn't fully understand himself? That he was living someone else's memories? That Sarah's heart might be carrying more than just life? It might be carrying guilt, pain, and unfinished business? "I'll talk to you about it later," he promised, though he knew there would never be a good time. One particularly harrowing dream pushed Hal over the edge. This time, he wasn't just witnessing Jessica's final moments. He was feeling them. The cold steel of the knife pressed against his skin, slicing deep. Pain exploded through his body, and he screamed until his voice broke. When he woke, tears streamed down his face. For the first time, he questioned whether the heart inside him was truly a gift or a curse. Was he meant to solve Jessica's murder, or was he being punished for something he had no control over? Determined to find answers, Hal revisited the box of Sarah's belongings Ethan had given him. Buried beneath stacks of notes and photographs, he discovered a small journal wrapped in a faded ribbon. The entries inside revealed Sarah's growing obsession with Vincent, whom she believed was involved in Jessica's disappearance. According to Sarah's writings, Vincent worked at Maggie's bar as a bouncer and had a reputation for violence. Several women had reported assaults tied to him, but none of the cases stuck due to lack of evidence. Sarah suspected he used his position to prey on vulnerable patrons. luring them into dark alleys where no one would hear their cries for help. The last entry sent chills down Hal's spine. I think Vincent knows I'm on to him. If anything happens to me, look for the black van. License plate starts with IL547. Hal stared at the words, his mind racing. Sarah hadn't died in a random accident. She'd been silenced. Armed with new information, Hal decided to stake out Maggie's bar. Late one evening, he parked his car across the street, binoculars in hand. Hours passed without incident until a familiar black van pulled up to the curb. Its license plate matched the partial number from Sarah's journal, IL547. The driver stepped out, a man with a gaunt face and a jagged scar running down his left cheek. Vincent. Hal's heart raced, not just from fear, but from recognition. This was the man from his dreams. But as Hal watched, Vincent glanced around furtively before entering the bar. Something told Hal he wasn't just here for drinks. Evelyn watched Hal pacing the living room, his face etched with tension as he flipped through Sarah's journal for the 100th time. His hands trembled slightly and she noticed how often he winced, subtle signs that the stress was taking its toll. Hal, she said firmly, stepping into his path, you need to stop this. He looked up, startled but defensive. Stop what? This obsession. Evelyn gestured at the scattered papers on the coffee table. You're not sleeping, you're barely eating, and every night I hear you tossing and turning. It's like you've forgotten why we went through hell to get you here, to keep you alive. I haven't forgotten, Hal replied, his voice tight. But Evelyn, don't you see? This isn't just about me anymore. Sarah gave me her heart so I could live, and now it feels like she's asking me to finish what she started. That's ridiculous, Evelyn snapped, tears welling in her eyes. Sarah gave you a second chance at life, not a death sentence. You can't save everyone, Hal. You have to think about yourself for once. Her words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Hal wanted to tell her everything, the dreams, the fear coursing through him that wasn't entirely his own. But he knew she wouldn't understand. How could she? Even he didn't fully grasp what was happening. I'll be careful, he promised quietly, though they both knew it wasn't enough. Later that week, Claire stopped by after work, bringing takeout and an open mind. Unlike Evelyn, who saw Hal's fixation as reckless endangerment, Claire approached it with curiosity. As a data analyst, she had always been drawn to puzzles and patterns. So, she began, handing him a carton of Kung Pao chicken. Tell me more about these dreams. Hal hesitated, unsure if sharing would make him sound unhinged. But Claire's steady gaze reassured him. Slowly, haltingly, he recounted the vivid images, the emotions, and the eerie connections to Jessica's case. It's like I'm living someone else's memories, he admitted finally. And not just anyone, it's Sarah, or maybe even Jessica. Claire leaned back, tapping her fork against her lips thoughtfully. You know, there might actually be some science behind this. Have you talked to Dr. Patel about it? Hal frowned. What do you mean? Well, Claire explained, there's something called cellular memory. It's this theory that organs can carry traces of their donor's personality or experiences. People who've had transplants sometimes report weird cravings or changes in behavior, like liking foods they never used to enjoy. Maybe your dreams are part of that. Hal shook his head skeptically. That sounds far-fetched. Maybe, Claire conceded, but isn't it worth looking into? At least then you'd know whether you're chasing shadows or uncovering something real. The next morning, Hal scheduled an appointment with Dr. Patel, the cardiologist who had performed his transplant surgery. Sitting across from her in her office, surrounded by medical diplomas and framed photographs, Hal felt out of place, a mechanic trying to explain phenomena beyond his understanding. Dr. Patel, he began awkwardly, I need to ask you something unusual. She raised an eyebrow but nodded encouragingly. Go ahead. Hal took a deep breath. Is it possible for memories or emotions to transfer through organ donation? Like, could I somehow be experiencing things from my donor? Dr. Patel's expression softened, though skepticism lingered in her eyes. What you're describing is often referred to as cellular memory. While there are anecdotal reports of transplant recipients reporting personality changes or new preferences. There's no scientific evidence to support the idea that actual memories can transfer. From a physiological standpoint, the brain stores memories, not the heart. But what if, Hal hesitated, searching for the right words. What if it's not just about memories? What if feelings or instincts could pass along too? Dr. Patel sighed, leaning forward slightly. Look, Mr. Thompson, medicine doesn't have all the answers. Cellular memory is poorly understood, and while most scientists dismiss it as pseudoscience, I won't deny that some patients report profound shifts after receiving a transplant. Whether those shifts are psychological or biological, well, that's still up for debate. She paused, studying him carefully. Why do you ask? Are you experiencing something specific? Hal debated how much to share. In the end, he settled for a vague summary. Just dreams, vivid ones. They feel connected to my donor somehow. Dr. Patel nodded slowly. If these dreams are affecting your sleep or mental health, I recommend speaking with a therapist. But medically speaking, your heart is functioning perfectly. Whatever you're feeling likely has more to do with your subconscious than biology. As Hal left the office, her words echoed in his mind. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was all in his head. But deep down, he couldn't shake the conviction that Sarah's heart was guiding him towards something greater. Back home, Evelyn watched him warily as he paced the kitchen, lost in thought. You went to see Dr. Patel, didn't you? She asked pointedly. Yes, Hal admitted. She says it's probably nothing. But you don't believe her. Hal met her gaze, torn between honesty and reassurance. Evelyn, I don't know what to believe. All I know is that I can't ignore this. Not yet. Evelyn sighed, rubbing her temples. Fine, but promise me one thing. You'll be careful. Your health comes first, Hal. Always. He nodded, though the weight of her concern pressed heavily on him. Balancing his newfound purpose with the fragility of his recovery felt impossible. Yet somewhere deep inside, Sarah's heart beat steadily, urging him forward. Hal's meeting with Detective Ramirez marked a turning point in the investigation. Armed with Sarah's journal, his own recollections from the dreams, and the partial license plate number tied to Vincent's van, Hal laid out everything he knew. For once, Ramirez didn't dismiss him as a grieving transplant recipient chasing ghosts. She listened intently, her eyes narrowing as connections began to form. This is more than I have had on this case in years, Ramirez admitted, flipping through Sarah's notes. But if we're going to move forward, we need hard evidence, not just hunches. Hal nodded, understanding the stakes. He wasn't naive enough to think his dreams would hold up in court, but they were guiding him towards something tangible. Together, he and Ramirez pieced together a timeline of events leading up to Jessica's disappearance. One name kept surfacing, Victor Kane. Jessica's boyfriend at the time, Victor was described by friends as charming, yet volatile, a small-time criminal with ties to drug trafficking. According to Sarah's journal, Victor had been furious when Jessica threatened to leave him, accusing her of stealing money earmarked for a deal gone bad. Days later, she vanished without a trace. What struck Hal most was how closely Victor's description matched the man haunting his dreams. The gaunt face, the jagged scar, the tattooed arm wielding the knife. Could Victor Kane and Vincent be the same person? Ramirez pulled Victor's file, revealing a history of domestic disturbances and assault charges that had mysteriously disappeared after Jessica went missing. Even more chilling was the fact that Victor had dropped off the grid shortly afterward, leaving behind only whispers among old associates about a score that went south. We need to find him, Hal said firmly. If he's still alive, he knows what happened to Jessica. And if he's not, Ramirez countered, her tone grim, then we dig until we find proof of what he did. Their search led them to an abandoned warehouse on Chicago's South Side, rumored to be a hideout for low-level criminals. Tips from Ramirez's network suggested Victor occasionally returned to lay low when things got too hot elsewhere. Hal insisted on accompanying Ramirez during the stakeout, despite her protests. You're not law enforcement, Hal, she warned. This isn't your fight. It is now, Hal replied evenly. Sarah gave me her heart so I could live. If there's even a chance I can bring justice for Jessica, then I owe it to both of them to see this through. Reluctantly, Ramirez agreed, but only under strict conditions. Hal would stay back unless absolutely necessary. For hours they sat in silence, watching the dilapidated building through binoculars. Just as fatigue began to set in, movement caught Hal's eye. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man with a gaunt face and a familiar scar running down his cheek. "That's him," Hal whispered hoarsely. Ramirez radioed for backup, but before reinforcements could arrive, Victor spotted their car. His expression hardened as he reached into his jacket, pulling out a gun. "Stay here," Ramirez ordered, stepping out cautiously with her weapon drawn. Hal ignored her command. This wasn't just Ramirez's case anymore. It was his life, his purpose. As Victor bolted toward the alley, Hal followed, driven by a force he couldn't explain. The chase ended in the same dark alley Hal had seen countless times in his dreams. Victor spun around, cornered, his gun trembling in his hand. "You shouldn't have come looking for me," Victor snarled, his voice distorted with rage. Hal froze, memories flooding back in vivid detail. He saw Jessica running, screaming, clutching the silver locket. He felt the cold steel of the knife slicing through flesh. And now, standing face to face with the man responsible, every ounce of fear and anger surged within him. Not just his own, but Sarah's and Jessica's too. "I know what you did," Hal said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "I've seen it, felt it. You took her life, and you silenced Sarah when she got too close." Victor's eyes widened, panic flickering across his face. "You're crazy. You don't know anything." Before he could react, Ramirez appeared, her gun trained on Victor. "Drop the weapon, Kane. It's over." For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then with a guttural cry, Victor lunged at Hal, his knife glinting in the dim light. Hal reacted instinctively, sidestepping just as Ramirez fired a single shot. Victor collapsed, the knife clattering to the ground beside him. In the days that followed, forensics confirmed Victor Kane's involvement in Jessica's murder. Evidence found in the warehouse, including clothing stained with blood matching Jessica's DNA, finally brought closure to a case long forgotten. Hal attended the memorial service held for Jessica, where her family expressed their gratitude for his role in solving the mystery. Ethan Collins stood beside him, tears streaming down his face as he thanked Hal for honoring Sarah's memory. Yet as Hal walked away from the gathering, he couldn't shake the lingering weight of what he'd experienced. The dreams had stopped since confronting Victor, but the emotions remained, a bittersweet reminder of lives lost and redeemed. Evelyn met him at home, wrapping her arms around him tightly. "It's done now," she murmured. "You can rest." Hal nodded, though he knew part of him would never truly be at peace. Sarah's heart continued to beat within him, a testament to sacrifice, resilience, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. And perhaps, just perhaps, it carried a little piece of Jessica's soul too, a final gift ensuring her story would never fade into oblivion. The dreams had grown darker, more insistent. Hal couldn't escape them, no matter how tightly he clutched Evelyn in the dead of night or how many cups of chamomile tea he forced himself to drink before bed. Each vision pulled him deeper into Jessica Monroe's final moments, sharpening details until they felt like shards of glass cutting through his mind. One night, as he lay awake, the dream came again. But this time, it was different. Victor Kane's face emerged from the shadows with startling clarity, the scar running down his cheek, the jagged edges of his teeth when he sneered. It wasn't just a stranger anymore. Hal jolted upright, his heart pounding wildly. He knew that face. Victor worked as a janitor at St. Michael's Hospital, the very place where Hal had received his second chance at life. The next morning, Hal didn't waste time. Ignoring Evelyn's protests and Claire's cautious advice, he drove straight to the hospital. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. How could fate be so cruel? The man who had taken Jessica's life and silenced Sarah was now walking the same halls where Hal had been given new life. He found Victor mopping the floor near the cafeteria, his gaunt frame hunched over the bucket. Hal approached cautiously, adrenaline surging through him. "Victor Kane," Hal said, his voice low but firm. Victor glanced up, startled, then recognition flickered in his cold eyes. "Do I know you?" "You killed Jessica Monroe," Hal accused, stepping closer. Victor stiffened, his grip tightening on the mop handle. You're out of your mind, old man. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, Hal shot back, his voice rising despite himself. I've seen her memories. I've lived them. You think I'm crazy? Fine. But I know what you did, and I know Sarah tried to stop you. At the mention of Sarah's name, Victor's mask cracked. Fear flashed across his face, followed by something else. Guilt. I didn't touch Sarah, Victor muttered, avoiding Hal's gaze. She got too close, sure, but she wasn't supposed to end up dead. That was an accident. Hal's stomach churned. And Jessica? Was she an accident too? Victor hesitated, glancing around nervously. Look, there are people who don't want this dug up. If you keep poking around, you'll regret it. Trust me. What does that mean? Hal demanded, stepping even closer. Who else is involved? Victor shook his head, backing away. I'm not saying another word. Leave it alone, or you'll wish you had. Before Hal could respond, Victor dropped the mop and hurried down the hallway, disappearing into the labyrinth of corridors. Back home, Hal replayed the confrontation in his mind, Victor's warning echoing ominously. There are people who don't want this dug up. Who were these people? Had Victor acted alone, or was he merely a pawn in something bigger? Hal returned to Sarah's journal, searching for any hints she might have left behind. Buried between pages filled with notes and sketches, he found a crumpled receipt dated days before her death. It was from a storage facility on the outskirts of town. Written in Sarah's handwriting along the edge were the words, Jessica's belongings. Don't trust anyone. Claire joined him later that evening, poring over the clue. This could be important, she said, her brow furrowed. If Victor wasn't working alone, maybe whatever Sarah hid here will tell us who else was involved. Hal nodded grimly. Then we need to check it out. Tonight. Under the cover of darkness, Hal and Claire arrived at the storage facility. Using information Hal had pieced together from Sarah's notes, they located Unit 14B. Inside, stacked neatly on metal shelves, were boxes labeled with Jessica's name. They sifted through the contents, photo albums, journals, and personal effects. But one item stood out, a locked safe tucked beneath a pile of blankets. Hal pried it open using tools borrowed from his garage, revealing a stack of documents inside. Among them was a contract bearing Victor's signature and the signatures of two other men. One name jumped off the page, Dr. Marcus Langston, a prominent cardiologist at St. Michael's Hospital. Hal's blood ran cold. The pieces began falling into place. Victor hadn't acted alone. He'd been part of a larger operation involving powerful figures within the hospital. Jessica's investigation into Victor's criminal ties must have uncovered their secrets, leading to her murder. And Sarah, determined to expose the truth, had paid the ultimate price. But why target Sarah? What had she discovered that posed such a threat? As Hal stared at the contract, dread settled in his chest. Whatever conspiracy he'd stumbled upon reached far beyond Victor Kane, and far closer to home than he ever imagined. Hal couldn't unsee the name on the contract. Dr. Marcus Langston. A respected cardiologist at St. Michael's Hospital, the very man who had overseen parts of Hal's post-transplant recovery. The implications were staggering. If Langston was involved in Jessica's murder, then Sarah's death might not have been an accident either. Hal wrestled with the enormity of what he'd uncovered. How deep did this conspiracy go? And how could he expose it without risking his own life, or those of the people he loved? Claire noticed his distress as they sat together late that night, poring over the documents from the storage unit. Dad, she said gently, there's something we're missing. Something big. Hal nodded absently, flipping through Sarah's notes again. Then he froze. Tucked inside one of her journals was a cryptic entry. Recorded Vic tonight. He talks too much when he's scared. Backup copy hidden safe. Backup copy? Claire echoed, leaning closer. What does that mean? It means Sarah didn't trust anyone. Not even the police, Hal replied, his voice tinged with awe. She recorded Victor spilling his guts, but if those tapes went missing from evidence, someone must have covered it up. Claire's eyes widened. If we can find those recordings, we'll have proof, Hal finished, determination hardening his features. Their search led them to Detective Ramirez, who listened intently as Hal explained their theory about the missing recordings. I remember those tapes, Ramirez admitted reluctantly. They disappeared shortly after Sarah's death. Everyone assumed they were lost in transit or mishandled by evidence clerks. But she hesitated, glancing around nervously. There were rumors back then, whispers about corruption within the department. Some detectives thought certain cases were being buried intentionally. Do you think someone kept copies? Hal asked urgently. Ramirez shook her head. I don't know, but there's one person who might. Detective Frank Delaney. He retired years ago after blowing the whistle on some shady dealings. He always played things close to the chest, though. If anyone held onto those tapes for leverage, it would be him. Detective Frank Delaney lived in a modest house on the outskirts of Chicago, surrounded by overgrown shrubs and rusted garden tools. When Hal and Claire arrived, the former cop greeted them warily, his weathered face betraying decades of distrust. You two should turn around and forget whatever mess you're digging into, Delaney warned gruffly. We're not leaving until you hear us out, Hal insisted, holding up Sarah's journal. This belonged to Sarah Collins. She recorded Victor Kane confessing to Jessica Monroe's murder. Those tapes disappeared after her death, but we believe you made backup copies. Delaney's expression darkened. You're treading dangerous ground here, Mr. Thompson. People died because of what's on those tapes, including Sarah. And I'm alive because of her, Hal countered, his voice steady despite the weight of emotion behind it. Her heart beats inside me now. Whatever secrets she tried to uncover, they're my responsibility too. For a long moment, Delaney studied Hal, searching for sincerity in his eyes. Finally, he sighed and motioned for them to follow him inside. In the dim light of his study, Delaney retrieved a dusty shoebox from the top shelf of his closet. Inside were cassette tapes labeled meticulously, Sarah Collins interview, Victor Kane. These are all I have left, Delaney said grimly. Listen carefully. What you hear may change everything and put targets on your backs. Back home, Hal and Claire set up an old tape player and pressed play. Sarah's voice filled the room, calm but resolute as she questioned Victor about Jessica's disappearance. At first, Victor denied involvement, but under Sarah's persistent probing, cracks began to show. I didn't mean for it to happen, Victor snapped, his voice trembling. She found out about the drugs, about Langston's operation. We were just supposed to scare her, make her keep quiet. But things got out of hand. What operation? Sarah pressed. Langston's been laundering money through the hospital for years, Victor admitted bitterly. Fake surgeries, ghost patients. It's all part of it. Jessica stumbled onto something she shouldn't have. And then you started poking around. The recording ended abruptly, leaving Hal and Claire in stunned silence. So it wasn't just about silencing Jessica, Claire whispered. It was about protecting a criminal empire. Hal clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface, and Sarah gave her life trying to stop it. With the recordings in hand, Hal knew they had enough to bring down Langston and his accomplices, but doing so wouldn't be easy. Powerful men like Langston didn't fall without a fight. Hal reached out to Ramirez, who agreed to help take the evidence to internal affairs. Together, they orchestrated a plan to leak the tapes to trusted media outlets while ensuring protections were in place for themselves and their families. As the scandal broke, headlines blazed across Chicago. Prominent cardiologist implicated in murder cover-up, corruption scandal rocks St. Michael's Hospital. Victor Kane was arrested, along with several high-ranking officials tied to Langston's operation. Dr. Marcus Langston attempted to flee but was apprehended at O'Hare Airport, his reputation shattered. Months later, Hal stood beside Evelyn at Maggie's bar, which had since reopened under new management. They raised a toast to Sarah and Jessica, whose memories had finally been honored. Evelyn squeezed his hand tightly. You did what you set out to do, Hal. You brought justice where there was none. Hal nodded, feeling the steady rhythm of Sarah's heart within him. It wasn't just a gift anymore, it was a legacy. And as he looked out at the city skyline, bathed in the glow of sunset, Hal realized something profound. Sometimes second chances weren't just about living, they were about making every beat count. The recordings were a chilling confession, laid bare in Sarah's calm but relentless questioning. Victor Kane's voice trembled with guilt as he recounted the night Jessica Monroe died. It wasn't supposed to happen like that, Victor muttered, his tone laced with regret. We just wanted to scare her, make her keep quiet about what she knew, but she fought back. She screamed, "I lost control." Sarah pressed him further. "What did you do after?" "I panicked," Victor admitted. "I dragged her body into the van and dumped it somewhere no one would find it. Then I called Detective Hargrove. He owed me for helping bring down those dealers last year. He made sure nothing stuck to me." Hal paused the tape, exchanging a stunned glance with Claire. The conspiracy was worse than they'd imagined. Not only had Victor murdered Jessica, but a corrupt cop had actively covered it up to protect an informant. "This changes everything," Claire whispered. "If we hand this over, it'll blow the case wide open." "And put us directly in the line of fire," Hal added grimly. But there was no turning back now. Sarah's sacrifice demanded justice, not just for Jessica, but for everyone whose lives had been shattered by this web of corruption. Hal arranged a meeting with Detective Ramirez at a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. When she arrived, her expression was unreadable, though Hal could sense the weight of anticipation hanging over her. "Detective," Hal began, sliding the cassette tapes across the table. "This is what Sarah risked her life to uncover." Ramirez hesitated before picking up the tapes, her fingers brushing against the worn labels. "Where did you get these?" "From a retired detective named Delaney," Hal explained. "He kept them as insurance against corruption within the department. These tapes prove Victor killed Jessica, and that Detective Hargrove helped cover it up." Ramirez listened intently as Hal summarized the contents of the recordings. Her jaw tightened with each revelation, anger simmering beneath her composed exterior. "This is enough to reopen the case," she said finally. "But going after Hargrove won't be easy. He's got connections, and people like him don't go down without a fight." "We can't let fear stop us," Hal replied firmly. "Sarah gave me her heart so I could live. If I don't use this second chance to honor her memory, then what's the point?" Ramirez nodded slowly, resolve hardening in her eyes. "All right, Mr. Thompson, let's do this right." With the tapes as evidence, Ramirez moved swiftly. A warrant was issued for Victor Kane's arrest, and officers raided his apartment early the next morning. Hal watched from a distance as Victor was led away in handcuffs, his gaunt face twisted in fury. "You think this ends here?" Victor spat as he passed Hal. "You're playing with forces you don't understand." Hal stood his ground, refusing to show fear. "It ends today, Victor. For Jessica, for Sarah, and for everyone else you've hurt." Meanwhile, Detective Hargrove was taken into custody later that afternoon. Faced with irrefutable evidence of his involvement in the cover-up, Hargrove cracked under interrogation, implicating higher-ups within the department who had turned a blind eye to Victor's crimes in exchange for information on other cases. As news of the arrest spread, Chicago erupted in outrage. Headlines blazed across every major outlet: "Corrupt cop exposed in cold case murder cover-up." The scandal sent shockwaves through the police force, prompting calls for sweeping reforms. Weeks later, Hal attended a private memorial service organized by Ethan Collins to honor both Jessica and Sarah. Friends, family, and even strangers gathered to pay their respects, lighting candles in remembrance of two lives tragically cut short. Ethan approached Hal afterward, tears shining in his eyes. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "Sarah never stopped fighting for justice, even when it cost her everything. You finished what she started." Hal shook his head humbly. "She did the hard part. All I did was follow the trail she left behind." As he walked home that evening, Evelyn greeted him with a warm embrace. "You've done enough, Hal. It's time to let go now." Hal nodded, feeling the steady rhythm of Sarah's heart within him. For the first time in months, the dreams had ceased entirely. It was as if Sarah's spirit could finally rest, knowing her mission had been fulfilled. In the weeks and months that followed, Hal found solace in rebuilding his life. He returned to tinkering in his garage, rekindling old hobbies he'd neglected during his obsession with the case. Evelyn encouraged him to join a support group for transplant recipients, where he shared stories of gratitude and resilience. Yet Sarah's presence lingered, not as a haunting memory, but as a quiet reminder of the power of courage and sacrifice. Hal often thought about how one woman's determination had changed countless lives, including his own. One evening, as he sat beside Evelyn watching the sunset, Hal placed a hand over his chest, feeling the steady beat of his donor heart. "She gave me more than just life," he murmured softly. "She gave me purpose." And in that moment, surrounded by love and peace, Hal realized that true justice wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about honoring the brave souls who refused to let darkness win. The courtroom was silent as the jury foreman stood to deliver the verdict. Hal sat in the back row, his hands clasped tightly together, Evelyn by his side. Jessica Monroe's family filled the front benches, their faces etched with years of grief now on the brink of resolution. "Guilty," the foreman announced, his voice steady but heavy with finality. A collective breath swept through the room. Jessica's mother buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly, while her father stared straight ahead, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. After 5 long years, justice had finally been served. Victor Kane showed no remorse as he was led away in handcuffs, his head bowed not out of shame, but resignation. The corrupt cop, Detective Hargrove, received a separate sentence for obstruction of justice, stripped of his badge and pension, a small price compared to the lives destroyed by his actions. Hal remained seated long after the proceedings ended, watching as Jessica's family embraced one another. He felt a bittersweet mix of emotions, relief that the truth had come to light, sorrow for the lives lost along the way, and gratitude for the role he'd played in bringing closure to those who needed it most. As he stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, Hal paused, closing his eyes briefly. For the first time in months, the weight pressing against his chest felt lighter, not because Sarah's heart beat any differently, but because its purpose had been fulfilled. That evening, Hal sat alone in his garage, surrounded by tools and half-finished projects. The space had always been his sanctuary, a place where he could think clearly without distractions. Tonight, however, his mind wasn't racing with questions or theories. It was quiet, reflective. He picked up Sarah's journal, which he'd kept close throughout the investigation. Flipping through its pages, he traced the handwriting that had guided him through so much. Her words were a testament to courage, determination, and an unyielding desire for justice. Hal wondered, not for the first time, if some part of her spirit truly lived on within him. Was it possible that her memories, her instincts, had carried over through her heart? Or was it simply coincidence, the universe nudging him toward unfinished business? He didn't have answers, nor did he expect to find them. Science might never explain why he'd experienced what he did, or whether cellular memory held any merit beyond anecdotal tales. But perhaps understanding wasn't the point. What mattered was the impact. Sarah's sacrifice hadn't just given him a second chance at life. It had given him a purpose. Through her heart, he'd honored Jessica's memory, exposed corruption, and brought peace to families torn apart by tragedy. Hal smiled faintly, placing the journal back on the shelf. Whatever force had guided him, whether science, fate, or something else entirely, he owed Sarah more than words could express. Evelyn found him moments later, leaning against the workbench with a contemplative look on his face. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly, wrapping an arm around his waist. "I'm okay," Hal replied honestly. "Better than I've been in a long time." Evelyn nodded, sensing the shift in him. Gone was the restless energy that had consumed him for months. In its place was a quiet acceptance, a newfound appreciation for the fragility and beauty of life. "You know," Hal continued, "I used to think this heart was just borrowed, like I was living on borrowed time. But now I realize it's more than that. It's a gift, not just from Sarah, but from everyone who fought alongside her. Claire, Ramirez, even Ethan. They all helped me see that justice isn't about revenge, it's about healing." Evelyn kissed his cheek tenderly. "You've earned this peace, Hal. Now it's time to live the life Sarah gave you." Hal smiled, pulling her closer. "Yeah, and maybe next week I'll finally fix that old lawnmower." They laughed together, the sound warm and genuine. For the first time in years, Hal felt whole, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. In the months that followed, Hal found ways to honor Sarah's memory beyond solving Jessica's case. He began volunteering at St. Michael's Hospital, mentoring patients awaiting transplants, and sharing his story to inspire hope. One day, while walking through the hospital gardens, he came across a plaque dedicated to organ donors. Among the names engraved in polished stone was Sarah Collins. Hal knelt beside it, running his fingers over the letters. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything." As he stood and turned to leave, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves above him, carrying with it a sense of peace. Whether it was Sarah's spirit or simply the wind didn't matter. What mattered was the knowledge that her legacy would endure, not only in the lives she saved, but in the hearts she touched. And deep inside, Hal knew he'd carry a piece of her forever. Life after the trial was quieter, yet richer in ways Hal hadn't anticipated. With the mystery resolved, he turned his attention inward, reconnecting with Evelyn, rediscovering old passions, and finding new purpose in giving back to others. Evelyn noticed the change almost immediately. The man who had once been consumed by shadows and sleepless nights now greeted each day with a sense of gratitude that radiated through their home. They spent evenings together on the porch, sipping tea and reminiscing about simpler times. Hal also rekindled his love for teaching. At the local community center, he began mentoring young mechanics, sharing not just technical skills but life lessons too. His students admired him, not just for his expertise, but for the quiet strength he exuded. "You've got to fix more than cars," he told them one afternoon, wiping grease from his hands. "Sometimes you've got to fix people, including yourself." Claire marveled at the transformation. "I don't think I've ever seen you this happy, Dad," she said during one of their weekly dinners. Hal chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "It's funny. I spent so long chasing answers, thinking they'd make me whole. But it wasn't until I stopped running that I realized I already was." On the anniversary of his transplant, Hal went to bed early, exhausted from a full day of volunteering and tinkering in the garage. As he drifted off, he braced himself for the dreams that had haunted him for so long, but none came. Instead, there was only silence. Peaceful, profound silence. Until one final vision pulled him into its embrace. He found himself standing in a field bathed in golden light, the air warm and fragrant. Before him stood Jessica Monroe, her smile radiant, her eyes filled with serenity. She wore the silver locket Hal had seen so many times before, but now it gleamed brightly, untarnished by tragedy. Jessica didn't speak, at least not with words. Instead, she mouthed two simple phrases, her lips moving slowly, deliberately. "Thank you." Then, as quickly as she appeared, she faded into the light, leaving Hal awash with emotion. He woke with tears streaming down his face, his heart pounding steadily within his chest. Evelyn stirred beside him, reaching out instinctively. "What is it?" she murmured, her voice heavy with concern. Hal wiped his eyes, smiling despite the ache in his throat. "It's over," he whispered. "She's at peace." Evelyn held him close, understanding without needing an explanation. In the days that followed, Hal carried the dream with him like a sacred memory. It wasn't just Jessica thanking him, it was Sarah too. Together they had given him more than a second chance at life. They had shown him the power of resilience, justice, and love. Hal continued mentoring young mechanics, volunteering at the hospital, and spending cherished moments with Evelyn and Claire. Each heartbeat reminded him of the lives intertwined with his own. The ones lost, the ones saved, and the ones still unfolding. And though he would never fully understand the mysteries of the heart, both literal and metaphorical, he knew one thing for certain. Every beat mattered, every moment counted, and every voice, no matter how silenced, deserved to be heard. For Harold Hal Thompson, life wasn't just about living anymore. It was about making every second count, for himself, for Sarah, and for all those whose stories shaped his journey.